Easy as breathing, but hard as hell, by Pride and Prejudice. I can't find my cleats, Megumi said, standing at the end of the hallway as Satoru sat in the living room, trying to twist Tsumiki's hair into a bun. Satoru looked up and grimaced when he saw that the grass stains hadn't fully been washed out of Megumi's baseball uniform. Luckily today was only practice. He had a couple more days before the next game to try to get the stains out. Did you check? Oh, Satoru, that's too tight. Tsumiki winced as he put in another bobby pin. Sorry, he said, pulling it back out and trying again. Megumi, did you check the laundry room? Without answering, Megumi turned around to go look through the shoes piled at the laundry room. Satoru returned his attention to Tsumiki's bun. It had been a little over 2 months since Megumi and Tsumiki had moved in with him. A little over 2 months of them taking packed lunches to school and being read bedtime stories, and being enrolled in extracurriculars for the first time in their lives. They were well-fed, well-rested, and well-dressed, and Satoru was so pleased, even if he was no longer any of those things himself. It had been as easy as breathing to bring them into his life, to consider them his own flesh and blood, to love them as his own children. Yet, somehow, it was simultaneously the hardest thing Satoru has ever done. He'd been busy before this. He was the most powerful jujutsu sorcerer of this era, and anything above a grade 1 fell directly into his lap. He was also the future of the Gojo clan, and expected to participate in intra-clan meetings and inter-clan negotiations. Both of those things had him traveling frequently, and left him mentally exhausted, either from the strain of still learning to use red and blue simultaneously, or from trying to explain the most basic critical thoughts to clan members 3 times his age. Neither of those were things that he could put on the back burner, which meant he'd had to install a few more metaphorical front burners, because in exchange for a safe place for the kids to live, a faculty house within the Jujutsu High barrier, he'd promised to lead the students in combat training at school several days a week. Not to mention, he was now responsible for the well-being and happiness of 2 small children. He was packing lunches, reading bedtime stories, and seeing them to and from extracurriculars, and he was exhausted. A full night's sleep was a rare occurrence at this point, and he was often so tired that he felt too nauseous to eat. Today was a prime example. Tsumiki had had a ballet recital the night before, they'd hit traffic when driving back, and when they'd gotten home, Megumi had needed help with his math homework. The moment he'd put them down for bed, he'd been called out to handle a conflict with the Kamo clan that had taken hours to resolve, not falling into bed until 4 in the morning. And then he'd awoken up this morning at 7 when Megumi had dropped and shattered a mug, spilling orange juice everywhere, and had needed Satoru to lift him out of the mess so he didn't cut his bare feet on any ceramic shards. Before he'd fallen back asleep, he had been immediately called to handle a curse in Niigata. And between taking the Shinkansen there, finding the damn thing, and catching the Shinkansen back, he was just in time for the kids to get home from school, and it started all over again. So yeah, he was barely awake right now. His hands were uncoordinated, and he kept messing up Tsumiki's bun, and she was getting restless, asking, "Are you done yet?" every few minutes, her fingers drumming against his knee restlessly. "Almost, just hold still," he said, but it still looked sloppy. You'd think he'd be better at this, given how much time he used to spend combing Suguru's hair, but clearly he'd lost that particular muscle memory. And really, he couldn't be too mad about that. Anything he'd managed to forget about Suguru was a blessing. He still hurt to think about. He took out one of the pins and tried wrapping it a bit tighter. "I don't see them in the laundry room," Megumi said upon his return to the living room. Satoru sighed. "Under your bed?" he suggested, and Megumi walked off again to check. "I still need to get dressed," Tsumiki said, bouncing on her heels. "We're going to be late." "We're not going to be late," he said, voice strained. "I just want to make sure this looks right. Hold still." "Ow!" she complained again, about his particular placement of the pin. He held in a groan and pulled out that pin as well, and was just about to redo it when Megumi appeared once more and said, "I still can't find them." Satoru closed his eyes, taking a deep breath and trying to stand calm. His brain was too burnt out right now to handle ricocheting between 2 separate tasks. "Okay, just give me a minute and I'll help you look," he said, hoping he sounded more collected than he felt. Megumi rocked back and forth on his feet for a couple of seconds before coming to stand beside Satoru, leaning in too close, his breath tickling Satoru's neck, to get a closer look at Tsumiki's hair before asking, "Are you almost done?" and breaking Satoru's concentration for the upteenth time. He fumbled the bobby pin, dropping it to the floor, and his fraying patience was finally snapped. "For fuck's sake, Megumi, I said give me a minute!" It took less than a second for him to realize what he'd done, and he felt molten hot guilt begin to pool in his stomach. He was just about to apologize when Tsumiki whipped around. "Don't shout at him!" she yelled. Satoru jolted, as surprised by her outburst as they had been by his, and Tsumiki flinched, and his hatred for Tsumiki's mother and Toji skyrocketed. Instantly, all of the frustration in him was gone. He softly placed his hand on the cheek that Tsumiki had turned away from him to guide her back. "I'm sorry," he said, looking into her eyes, then over at Megumi, who was staring at him in shock. "Megumi, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to yell. I just need 5 more minutes to finish your sister's hair. Then I'll help you find your cleats, okay?" His voice was soft, but he knew that wouldn't bring back any of the trust they'd had in him that his mistake had just cost. "Tsumiki, can I please finish your hair?" She still had a pat on her lips, but nodded and turned back around. Megumi had left the room without another word, and Satoru had never felt like a bigger piece of shit. "There, all done," he said, when her bun was pinned into place. "Go put on your leotard and your tights this time, please." He gently nudged her towards the room before standing up and going to find Megumi's cleats. They were in the first place he looked, the laundry room on top of the dryer. He sighed and picked them up to carry them to Megumi's room. The door had been shut. He knocked cautiously. "Megumi, can I come in?" He heard a muffled grunt from inside, which he took as a yes, and opened the door. Megumi was lying on his stomach on the bed, playing on his Game Boy. When Megumi glanced at him, Satoru held up the cleats as a peace offering, then walked inside and sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry, Megumi, I shouldn't have snapped at you. You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. He wanted to reach out and ruffle Megumi's hair, but knew what those kids had gone through. He should give him a bit of space. Megumi deserved the opportunity to be the one to close the gap that Satoru had created. "Whatever," was all he said before rolling off the bed and grabbing the cleats from Satoru's hand. He then walked out of the bedroom, leaving Satoru to drop his head in his hands, pulling his hair in frustration. This time, it was all aimed at himself. He dug his nails into his scalp just for a second before he met the kids at the front door and ushered them into the car. The drive was silent, both kids just looking out the windows from their booster seats in the back. "Have fun," he told Megumi as he hopped out at the Little League field. Megumi just raised his hand in what could probably be considered a wave, which was better than nothing. Tsumiki at least gave him a quiet "thank you" when he dropped her off at the ballet studio. He'd watched until she'd made it inside before he put the car in drive. Then he shifted immediately back into park and let his head fall back against the headrest. Why had he thought he could do this? Give 2 kids a normal life? With his own age still starting with a 1. He was still a fucking kid. He wasn't fit to be a parent. And having a teenager as a guardian clearly didn't help with them fitting in. They deserved someone better. And it was so unfair that they didn't have it. He let out a deep sigh, then turned the car off. He knew he should head to the grocery store and pick up food for the week, but he just couldn't force himself to. He needed a fucking nap, but the universe wasn't that merciful. He'd just reclined the seat, planning on sleeping until Tsumiki's class ended when his phone rang. It was Yaga's ringtone. "You've gotta be fucking kidding me," he croaked to himself, before answering with a sharp, "What now?" Yaga was unfazed, already overly familiar with the hormones that made teenagers act like assholes. "There's a first-grade curse user in Miyagi. We need you up there now." Satoru muttered another curse under his breath. "I just dropped the kids off at their sports. Someone will need to pick them up." Yaga sighed. "Our assistant supervisors aren't your babysitters, you know." "Well, unless you want to handle a first-grade curse user, they're gonna act like it," he snapped, but realized that was unfair. He took a deep breath and tried again. "The kids can handle themselves for dinner and bedtime. They just need a ride home. Can you please send someone to pick them up?" After a pause, Yaga sighed. Fine, I'll send someone. Satoru could sleep just about anywhere, but only if it was stationary. He didn't know why, but his body couldn't handle trying to sleep in a moving vehicle, especially not one as fast as the Shinkansen. Maybe it had to do with the 6 eyes, and the massive amount of information it was picking up when his surroundings were changing at 300 kilometers per hour. So, he leaned against the window, watching the backdrop fly by. Handling the curse user was blessedly easy, and he'd managed to catch the train back before service stopped for the night, but he still wouldn't be getting back before the kids had to put themselves to bed. So, when he arrived in Tokyo, he didn't head straight home. Instead, he made his way to the university and let himself doze off in front of an empty dorm room, until he heard a familiar energy heading his way, and heard a voice that lifted his spirits with its reassuring mockery. "Well, if it isn't the teen dad," Shoko said, when she finally returned to her room past midnight. Satoru looked up at her, and saw dark bags under her eyes and her half-zipped backpack hanging off one shoulder. Despite her academic dishonesty, apparently even Shoko still needed to spend evenings in the library like every other pre-med student. "You look like shit," she told him. "Words out of my mouth," he grunted, as he made his way slowly to his feet. She shook her head fondly, pushing past him to unlock her door. "What are you doing here, Satoru? Why didn't you call?" "Didn't want to interrupt your studying." "Well, now you're interrupting my plan to pass the fuck out," she said, letting him in. Her hand was on her hip, but she wasn't really upset. "What's up?" "Shoko, Jesus, this is pathetic." He looked up at the ceiling, then back down to her. "I need a hug," he admitted, knowing his face was flushed. Shoko's eyes widened, but she didn't say anything, didn't poke fun. She just opened her arms, freely giving what he desperately needed. He didn't hesitate, immediately leaning down to rest his head against her shoulder, sighing in relief when she brought her arms up around him, and he returned the embrace, grip probably a bit too tight, but she didn't complain. And it wasn't until he pulled away, several minutes later, that she asked, "All right, out with it. What happened?" He hesitated, his face screwing up in shame before he admitted, "I yelled at Megumi." She didn't say anything, just waited for him to get everything off his chest. "I'm in over my head, Shoko," he said, dropping onto the floor beside her bed. "I'm already exhausted from missions and leading training at JJK, but now I'm balancing making sure the kids are fed and helping with homework and getting them ready for baseball and ballet, and Megumi's class is having a bake sale, and I'm so tempted to just buy something from the store. Hell, I could single-handedly buy out the fundraiser, but I don't want Megumi to be the only kid who doesn't bring something home-baked. And I don't want Tsumiki to be the girl who doesn't wear her tights to ballet class, even if they make her legs itch and she hates me for making her wear them." Wow. Okay, slow down. That's a lot. Just take a breath, okay?" Shoko interrupted, sitting down beside him. He took a deep breath and fell onto his side to lean against her. "I thought I could do this. I thought I could make them happy and comfortable, but I'm just fucking everything up." Shoko was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. "Hey, Satoru, did they get to do baseball or ballet before you took them in?" "No," he groaned. "It's their first time, which means they're also behind the other kids in skill level." "Shut up," she interrupted, before he could fall down another rabbit hole of doomsday thinking. "That's not where I was going. Do you think they would have ever had the chance to play sports if they had to keep raising themselves?" "I don't know. No, dumbass. No, they wouldn't. They'd be too busy trying to feed themselves and do their homework without help. But it sounds like their biggest concern right now is that they might have to take store-bought cookies to their bake sale. Do you realize how life-changing that is for them? It's night and day for those kids." Satoru's sunglasses had slid down his nose, and he looked at her over the tops of them. "You think?" "Yes," she said, flicking his sunglasses back into place and hiding those ridiculous blue eyes. "And you're stupid if you think otherwise. No parent is perfect. You're gonna yell sometimes, and you're gonna miss out on some recitals and games, but you're doing your best. They see that. He wanted to believe her, but seeing Tsumiki flinch had shattered something in him. Even if it was just on instinct, for her to be afraid of his reaction, that was devastating. I'm not sure they do. Besides, I'm not their parent. Hey, listen to me. She met his gaze through his dark lenses to make sure he understood her through the haze of exhaustion. You're the closest thing they're ever going to have. A knot formed in his throat instantly, and he had to swallow it down. Had to bite his lip to keep it from quivering. After the couple of minutes it took to compose himself, he wrapped his arm around her shoulder. Thank you, Shoko. She leaned into him for a short moment, then nudged him off her. Now, will you please go home to your kids? I really do need to sleep. He snorted, but did as she asked, and made his way from the university and back to his home, his kids. It was 1:30 when he finally made it home, dragging in every sense of the word. He quietly removed his shoes, walked through the house, seeing signs that the kids had made it safely home everywhere. The blankets and pillows were still laid out on the floor in front of the TV, but the dishes from dinner had been washed and placed on the drying rack. He double-checked that all the burners had been turned off, and all the windows were locked before walking down the hallway. Tsumiki, now that she had a separate room from Megumi, slept in the dark, but with his 6 eyes, he didn't need any light to see that she was safely tucked away in bed. He walked through the dark and knelt down beside her bed, picking her stuffed zebra up off the floor to tuck back under her arm and kissing the crown of her head. Next was Megumi's room, dimly lit by an old lamp with crescent-shaped cutouts that projected moons on his walls. One of the few things he'd had to bring with him. Satoru didn't know when the kids were supposed to stop sleeping with nightlights, but even if that age was fast approaching, Satoru didn't think he'd ever have the heart to suggest putting it away. He crossed the room, stepping over the contents of Megumi's backpack littered across the floor, and pushed back his messy hair to kiss his forehead. When he stepped back into the hall, he nearly gave in to the temptation to walk directly into his own room and fall asleep. But he slapped himself on the cheeks to wake himself up, walked back into the kitchen, and began preheating the stove. His alarm went off at 6, but it took a full 2 minutes for the sound to break him out of his sleep. God, what he wouldn't give to hit the snooze button for just a few more minutes of unconsciousness. But combat lessons started at 7, and he knew Yago would tear him to shreds if he was late again. He rolled out of bed and began bumbling his way to the kitchen. The kids were already in the routine of getting themselves ready and walking to school, so he just had to be quiet in the mornings so as to not wake them up before they needed to be up. Luckily, since moving in with him, and knowing they were always safe in his house, they'd become deeper sleepers, so he didn't have to worry about being too quiet. Except for this morning, it seemed. As soon as he turned the coffee pot on, the small energy in Megumi's room began to stir, and started making its way to the kitchen. Satoru steeled himself, unsure if Megumi was still upset from yesterday, but his concerns dissolved around the second Megumi entered the kitchen. He collided with Satoru's leg without reservation, wrapping his arms around his waist with a tired, "Good morning." "Hey, kiddo," Satoru said, ruffling his hair. "It's still too early for you to be up. Go back to bed." Megumi grumbled, his face still pressed into Satoru's side. "Didn't see you before bed. Wanted to check you came back." Satoru let slip a fond chuckle. "Course I came back," he said, as though that were the one constant thing in their entire universe that Megumi could always count on. "I'm sorry we didn't get to read together last night. I made you cupcakes to take in today for the bake sale, though." All he was met with was a tired and Megumi leaning more heavily against him, practically asleep on his feet. He shook his head with a smile, then knelt down to pick him up. Megumi murmured something, but had gone limp in Satoru's arms nearly immediately, and as Satoru carried Megumi through the house and tucked him back into bed, he felt so much lighter than he had moments ago. He knew he still had Tsumiki's good graces to weasel his way back into, but given what he knew about her, she certainly didn't seem the type to hold grudges. So for now, he could make do with just Megumi's absolution. He returned to the kitchen to start on his first cup of coffee as he began his day. Though regardless of the obscene amount of caffeine he'd consumed that morning, he somehow still managed to get tripped by a student during combat training. And oh, he was so glad Shoko, or God forbid, Nanami, hadn't seen that, because he'd never live it down. Yaga had seen it, though, and had interrupted the combat lesson. Satoru, there's a situation we need you to handle in Shinjuku. I'll take over here, he had announced, then instructed the students to take a quick break as Satoru turned over the lesson. Satoru suppressed a groan at the idea of another mission, consoling himself with the fact that at least this one was local, as he quickly threw his jacket on over his t-shirt and approached Yaga for the details of the mission. But all Yaga said was, "Go on, get out of here." Satoru blinked at him dumbly for a minute. "The situation?" "You're the situation," he deadpanned. "I can't have you passing out in front of the students. Go get some sleep, and come better rested next week. Kyoto is going to kick our ass in the exchange event if our best combat teacher can get downed by second year." He didn't need to be told twice, and he was off the field and jogging back to his on-campus house in seconds. When he got back, the house was quiet, and the cupcakes were gone. At the school, along with both the kids. It was still morning, but that didn't matter. Regardless of the daylight shining in through the window, Satoru was asleep within a minute of his head hitting the pillow, and he slept like the dead. He didn't even wake up when the kids got home from school that afternoon, puttering around the kitchen and getting their afternoon snacks and working on their homework. Not even when they finished their homework and came to check on him, finding him face down and fast asleep. Not even when they crawled into his bed, settling on either side of him, silently passing Megumi's Game Boy back and forth whenever one of them died in Super Mario. It wasn't until the sun was setting that his body and mind had recovered enough from the weeks of sleep deprivation to wake up. He re-entered the world of consciousness slowly, and Tsumiki let out a small yelp when he rolled onto his back and nearly knocked her out of the bed. "Sorry," he grumbled out, sitting up slowly. "How was school? Did the bake sale go well?" Megumi hummed, still in the middle of his turn on the Game Boy and not really paying attention. So Satoru turned his attention to Tsumiki, who turned away from him with a hump. He felt his heart fall. "Are you still mad at me?" Satoru asked. "Yes. You said good morning to Megumi, and not me." Having expected far worse, Satoru couldn't help but laugh. "Sorry, Miki, but I couldn't wake you up. I know you need your beauty rest," he said, tucking her hair behind her ear. She giggled, dropping her qualm immediately. "Did you have a good day?" she asked. Megumi died in his game, so he shut it off and sat up as well, tuning in to the conversation. "Sure did," Satoru answered, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. "It's Friday, right?" He was met with two simultaneous nods, and he let out a relieved sigh. Fridays were gloriously free from sports and after-school activities. It was also their weekly kids' choice dinner, family movie night, which made his life so easy, because that meant getting junk food delivered and falling asleep on the couch to whatever children's movie they picked out that he had inevitably had no interest in. "Alright, Tsumiki, it's your turn to pick dinner. Megumi, you're on movie duty." Tsumiki's eyes lit up, and she was up and out of the room to grab the collection of delivery menus from beside the landline. Once she was out of the room, Megumi turned his attention back to Satoru. He just stared for a moment as Satoru found his glasses and stretched out on his back. Then he asked, "Are you okay? You don't nap much." "You worried about me?" Satoru grinned, then pulled Megumi into an obnoxious hug, rubbing his cheek against Megumi's already unruly hair. "I knew you loved me!" Megumi groaned and pushed Satoru off him, holding him at arm's length. "Never mind, I don't care." Satoru laughed, but gave Megumi a little shove. "I've just been a bit tired, but I'm fine, go on. I said you're on movie duty, so you better pick out something before Tsumiki decides on dinner." Megumi got off the bed but didn't leave the room. He looked back at Satoru. "We can do more," he said. "We know how. We did everything on our own before. We can cook and grocery shop. We can make our own lunches." Hey, where's this coming from?" Satoru cut him off, brow furrowed. Megumi looked down, scuffing his foot on the carpet. "You're tired because of us. 'Cause of how much you're doing for us. We can do more, so you don't." Satoru grimaced and took Megumi's hands in his, squeezing gently. I really am sorry I snapped at you yesterday. Being tired is no excuse to lose my temper, but it's not your responsibility to keep me from getting tired. I'm just still learning how to balance everything. Just give me time. I'll sort it out, okay? Megumi watched Satoru for a moment longer, then nodded eventually, and Satoru smiled at him before nudging him out of the room and towards the entertainment cabinet to pick out a movie while he called in delivery. But it was only 3 days before Satoru came home from a mission to find dinner on the stove, with Tsumiki standing on her little step stool stirring a pot, and Megumi standing on the counter as he put the seasonings back into the cupboard. Guys, Satoru sighed, picking Megumi up by his armpits to set him back down on the ground before he could fall and crack his head open. You knew I'd be back before dinner. I was going to cook tonight. He took over Megumi's task of putting the spice cabinet back together, then beckoned Tsumiki off her stool. Go on, do your homework, I've got this. Tsumiki didn't move. We finished our homework already, she told him proudly. Satoru looked over at Megumi. You too? We were going to work on your life cycle project tonight. The teacher helped me during recess, Megumi answered, and Satoru frowned. An unexpected lump formed in his throat, as he thought that he was failing so badly that they felt they couldn't rely on him, that they'd give up recess to get help from someone else besides him. You know that I wanted to do this, don't you? He asked them quietly. That I wanted to provide for you and help whenever you needed it. You don't have to do it all by yourselves anymore. But neither do you, Tsumiki said, her tone too magnanimous and mature for her age. You don't have to do everything on your own, not if we can help. I do, though. I want to give you what he didn't, he said. Megumi looked down at the mention of his father. Stability, normalcy, and I know I'm not really stable or normal enough to do it well, but me neither, Megumi interrupted. He folded his hands together to form the shadow of a dog, the shikigami he'd just mastered at 7 years old. I'm not normal. We don't need normal. Megumi let his hands fall back to his sides as Tsumiki chimed in. Plus, lots of kids at school only have moms, and they all have to help with chores and dinner. Satoru looked between the two of them, his shoulders slouching forward. I know, I promised to take care of you, and I don't want to let you down. We know you're not Choji, Megumi said, and Satoru's head snapped up. Even if you can't always be here, and you can't cook dinner every night, you want to. You want us. He never did. He saw the hurt about Toji's apathy in Megumi's eyes, and wanted to tell him he was wrong, but he was a terrible liar. So he spoke the truth he knew instead. I really do want to be here for you, always. You both mean the world to me, you know that, right? We know, Tsumiki said, grabbing his hand. You're the world to us too, Satoru. Then she smiled. So let us cook dinner for you sometimes, Kay? He was so thankful for his dark lenses when he felt the tears start welling in his eyes, and he knelt down to pull them both into a hug. You're both brats, he told them, but they knew what he meant. They knew unconditional love when they felt it, even if none of them had had the courage to say it out loud yet. You know it's rough? Whenever you're trying to speak normally the entire fic, but it just doesn't happen because every time you start out normal, it just ends up raspy by the end of the sentence and you can't fix it.